To me, he's the best in the world. He can...
Best footballer in the world?
I think so, yeah. I think so. Because there's efficient centre forwards. We've spoke about Kane, Lewandowski as well, and, you know, Haaland and whatever. They're like, you know, they're never going to let you down. They're always going to score plenty of goals. But in big games, in the most pressure, he can take a game away from someone. Probably better you answering it. But if you're a centre half, I don't think you're losing sleep if you're going to mark X, Y, Z, who I've just mentioned. None of them are going to beat you for skill. None of them are going to run away from you. None of them are going to strike fit. But Mbappe will. He's got the ability to embarrass you. If he gets you out wide, or he could bit of skill, his touch is brilliant. He's raw pace. He can finish.
Everyone in world football understands what France bring in attack, but at this specific World Cup, two names are separating themselves from the rest of that devastating unit with a level of performance that is making opposition coaches lose sleep. Kylian Mbappé and Michael Olise are operating on a completely different plane from almost everything else this tournament has to offer, and the combination of what each brings individually and what they create together is making France look genuinely unstoppable in the most frightening sense of that word. Mbappé transforms when the World Cup begins. Something shifts in him. His domestic seasons are extraordinary by any reasonable measure, but the World Cup activates a version of him that operates in a completely different register. The numbers behind his World Cup story are almost offensive in their quality. 15 appearances, 14 goals, a winner's medal, 4 goals in World Cup final matches alone. He scored 4 in Russia in 2018. He scored 8 in Qatar in 2022, including the hat trick that became one of the most iconic individual final performances in the tournament's history. And now in 2026, he has opened his account with a brace that served as another message to every nation still standing in France's path. Those 2 goals in the opening match moved Mbappé past multiple legends of the game and pushed him further up the all-time list. 14 World Cup goals before his 27th birthday, level with Gerd Müller, 1 behind Ronaldo Nazario, and just 2 away from the all-time record that Miroslav Klose set across 4 tournaments with Germany. The genuinely alarming part of that statistic is that Mbappé is still adding to the number right now in the present tense in a tournament that is only just beginning. To find players who have owned World Cup stages with this kind of sustained ruthlessness, you have to reach back to Pelé, Maradona, and Messi. That is the conversation Mbappé is forcing his way into through pure production rather than reputation. 2 World Cup finals scored in, 4 final goals accumulated across 2 appearances. A generational tournament player who becomes his most dangerous self precisely when the stakes are highest. When other players tighten up, Mbappé gets cleaner and more decisive. But what has elevated France from formidable to genuinely terrifying at this specific tournament is that Mbappé now has the most creative partner imaginable operating alongside him. And that partner arrived at the World Cup stage and immediately announced himself as the most important player nobody outside football obsessives had been talking about enough. Michael Olise, the most inventive and the most consistently dangerous creative force in world football right now. The player who could end up being the single most important reason France are lifting this trophy when the summer ends. He is completely unplayable when given space, and when denied space, he creates his own. His World Cup debut produced an absolute masterclass that the final scoreline could not fully capture. Mbappé took the headlines with his brace, as Mbappé always does, as Mbappé always will. But anyone who actually watched the game with their full attention knows the truth. Michael Olise changed what was happening on that pitch in a way that made everything else possible. 2 assists from the French number, and neither of them were the kind that just fall into your lap. Both required vision, technical execution, and the specific courage to attempt something that most players would not even recognize as an option. The first half saw Olise isolated on the left wing with the ball barely reaching him, and his response to that isolation tells you everything about the intelligence and the selflessness behind the individual brilliance. He did not wait. He did not stand out there and demand more service. He went looking for the game himself, switching positions with Dembélé and sliding into the number 10 space where he immediately became the most dangerous man on the pitch. The moment that positional shift happened, Senegal's defensive shape simply disintegrated because nobody had prepared for the version of Olise they were suddenly facing. He began operating between Senegal's midfield and their defensive line, finding gaps and pockets of space that should not have existed and creating problems that nobody had solutions for. The marking assignments fell apart. Instantly, nobody knew who owned him. Nobody could establish physical contact. Every touch he made carried threat. Every pass he attempted broke a line. And then came the moment that justified every superlative being thrown at him. Mbappe dropped into a pocket of space and made a diagonal run that required a pass of extraordinary precision to reach, a pass through a gap that most players would not even see as a gap, into a space that existed for approximately 2 seconds before it closed again. Olise saw it. One perfectly weighted delivery through the impossibility, one touch from Mbappe, one clinical finish. France led. The reaction from Mbappe immediately after scoring told the story more eloquently than any commentary could. He went straight to Olise and made it clear who the goal actually belonged to. The scorer was acknowledging the creator because the creation was so obviously the harder and more remarkable part of what had just happened. None of this is new. This is exactly the form Olise spent 12 months delivering at Bayern Munich before arriving at this tournament. Those 2 assists in his World Cup debut took his seasonal total to 33 assists. Add the goals to that number, and he is sitting on 55 combined contributions across the campaign. These are numbers that trigger Ballon d'Or conversations, numbers that demand you reconsider where this player sits in the global hierarchy, and he has carried every ounce of that form directly onto the World Cup stage without any adjustment period, any settling in, any learning curve. 5 goal contributions across his last 2 appearances for France. 3 goals, 2 assists, a player who is not peaking gradually, but arriving already at his highest level and refusing to come down from it, which is precisely why this specific partnership should be keeping opposition managers awake at night. 2 goals from Mbappe, 2 assists from Olise, the most precise finisher in this tournament, operating in complete combination with the most devastating creator in this tournament. One finds and attacks space with a timing and a reading of the game that nobody else in world football consistently replicates. The other delivers passes into that space that most players cannot even visualize existing, let alone execute into. Together, they are not just the most dangerous attacking partnership at this World Cup, they might be the most frightening combination in international football. Some people are framing this as Michael Olise's France, and that framing is completely understandable given what Olise is producing. But do not misread what this team actually is, because there is no version of this story where France belonged to anyone other than Mbappe. World Cup. Mbappe is a different entity from the Mbappe who operates the rest of the football year. There is a switch that activates, and when it does, we are watching one of the most complete and most decisive tournament players in the history of the game doing exactly what he was built for. If he sustains what he has done across every World Cup so far, the conversation at the end of this summer will not be about whether he is among the greatest tournament players ever. It will be about whether he is the greatest. Full stop. The numbers already make that case with extraordinary force, regardless of how emotionally uncomfortable that might make people who prefer other eras and other names. The story of Mbappe's World Cup journey starts in Russia in 2018. 19 years old, impossibly young for the stage he was about to command, arriving in what became his coronation as a global force rather than a promising youth. He scored 4 goals as France claimed their 2nd world championship, but the moment that crystallized his arrival came in the round of 16 against Messi's Argentina. The run that drew the penalty, the thunderous brace that followed. First, a movement inside the box that completely dismantled the Argentine defensive structure before the calm finish. Then the second, pure counterattack devastation, sprint down the flank, ruthless finish, Argentina eliminated. And then the final. The goal that announced to history that the next era had begun, Mbappe's strike from distance to complete France's 4th goal, becoming the first teenager to score in a World Cup final since Pelé had done it in 1958. World champion, tournament's best young player, and a superstar who had ceased being a prospect and become a fact. Qatar 2022 elevated the Mbappe story to something even harder to process rationally. 8 goals across the tournament, Golden Boot, and a performance in the final that almost single-handedly rescued a nation from defeat, an act of individual brilliance so extraordinary that it was ultimately not quite enough. The campaign began with an assist against Australia before he scored with a powerful header. Against Denmark, he struck twice. Against Poland, he delivered a total performance assist, then 2 rockets, a statement of dominance that echoed across the whole tournament. Then the final, the most complex individual performance in World Cup final history. 3 goals that brought France back from what felt like extinction twice. A hat trick that made him the first player to achieve that in a final since Jeff Hurst in 1966. He won the Golden Boot with 8 goals. He won the Silver Ball. He accumulated 4 final goals across 2 finals to become the highest scoring player in World Cup final history. He lost on penalties. He lost because Messi exists. Even in defeat, he had produced something that football will not stop talking about. Now comes 2026 and the possibility of a legacy that becomes genuinely unreachable for anyone who follows. Captain, Real Madrid's dominant figure, a player at the absolute summit of his powers arriving at the tournament where the remaining records are waiting to fall. His opening brace took him to 14 World Cup goals, level with Gerd Müller, ahead of Pelé, ahead of Fontaine, ahead of Messi in this specific category, ahead of essentially every name that football reveres. He is also now France's greatest ever international scorer, moving past Giroud's record and making history for his nation at the same time he is chasing history for the sport. 3 more World Cup goals and Miroslav Klose's all-time record disappears. 3 more goals in a tournament where Mbappé has averaged roughly 4 to 8 per campaign. The target feels reachable in a way that should make every other nation's goalkeeper deeply anxious. The player who could make that record even more inevitable is Olise, because the creative infrastructure Olise provides makes Mbappé's finishing opportunities both more numerous and more cleanly constructed than anything he would generate without that partnership. Olise's journey to this moment is a story of exceptional talent becoming genuinely historic performance through the right environment at the right time. 8 goal contributions in his first 8 Bundesliga matches set the tone. A brace against Leipzig announced he was not building towards something, he had already arrived. Great players are tested not against lesser opposition, but in the matches where the difficulty is maximum. And Olise delivered against Dortmund, against Freiburg, against Wolfsburg repeatedly, in the title-decisive fixtures where the pressure compounds with every passing week. By the season's end, he had 27 goals and 26 assists, 53 combined contributions, Bundesliga Player of the Season, and his Champions League campaign matched the domestic excellence. 2 goals and an assist against Atalanta, a performance against Real Madrid in the Bernabeu that made elite defenders look ordinary. A showing against PSG in the semifinals that announced his quality was genuinely without ceiling at this level. No winger in world football is doing what Olise is doing right now with the combination of volume, quality, and consistency he produces. When your name enters conversations about records associated with Messi, the descriptive vocabulary available to commentators undergoes a fundamental change. You are no longer a star being discussed in the ordinary superlative terms the sport applies to very good players. You are a player who might take over an entire World Cup by themselves. That is the conversation Olise has entered, and his debut performance on this stage delivered every confirmation required that the conversation is entirely justified. Back to the match itself, because the partnership in action is the thing that makes all the individual numbers feel like they are pointing towards something larger than the sum of the parts. The first half was not easy. Olise was starved on the wing with almost no service reaching him. A lesser player accepts the situation and hopes the second half brings better delivery. Olise moved himself into the problem and solved it by occupying the number 10 space where the game was actually happening. The warnings came immediately, then the breakthrough. Olise lifts his head, reads Mbappe's run a fraction before Mbappe has fully committed to making it, and delivers a pass of such precise weight and direction that the timing window it requires to work is measured in fractions of seconds. Mbappe between the center backs, 1 touch, 1 goal, France ahead. The second came from a different kind of moment. The ball breaking kindly for Mbappé outside the box, the connection clean and pure, the strike bending into the top corner with a velocity and precision that made it the most aesthetically complete goal the tournament has produced so far. Olise created, Mbappé executed, 2 assists, meeting 2 goals in a combination that looks increasingly like the foundation France will build a championship upon. Mbappé has already demonstrated in a World Cup final what he is capable of when carrying the weight of an entire nation's expectations. Olise is demonstrating week after week and now match after match that he can change games by himself regardless of what opposition system or personnel stands against him. Place them together on the same pitch, operating in combination, feeding each other's strengths, and you have something that world football has very rarely seen and that this World Cup is only beginning to understand the full danger of.